My name is Ursula James and I'm here with my student, Valerie, and we're going to talk today a little bit about the importance of ego strengthening and how fundamental it is to doing good work. So, first thing really is to say what ego strengthening is. And ego strengthening is the process whereby you help somebody feel better about themselves and their capabilities and what they've done and what they're intending to do. So essentially, you're giving somebody the confidence to be as good as they possibly can be. Mm-hmm. And ego strengthening has a particular function in a script. And in a hypnosis script, you start, as most of you know, with an induction where you take somebody into hypnosis, and that often involves eye closure, followed by a deepening where you make that more profound and they get to a level at which they're comfortable and receptive to suggestions. And then after that, you make the suggestions for whatever change they might like. And then we do ego strengthening before we wake somebody up. Now, I suppose the obvious question is, why do ego strengthening? Ego strengthening essentially is the fuel that will drive you to make that change. Because often people will say, well, yes, I know what I should be doing, but, for example, with weight loss or with smoking cessation, everybody knows they just shouldn't pick up the first cigarette. Most people know what they should be doing, especially with sort of, the more simple treatments. But when it comes to actually carrying out the change, that's why we do ego strengthening. It's to get somebody in a good mental state.
So is that why you do it at the end?
Yeah, you do it at the end because it's like, right, now you know what you should be doing. Here is the fuel to do it.
Okay.
And within that fuel are the three elements that I talked about in the other audio, and that was focus, motivation, and confidence. So I'm going to break them down now. Why do we start with focus? Well, focus is really important because when somebody doesn't really want to do something, they can find 100 reasons why not to do it. For example, smoking cessation. Can't stop this week, the dog's not well. Can't stop this week, I'm going on holiday. Can't stop this week. But if you get somebody to focus on the reasons why they're doing it, in other words, what the benefits are, you're much more likely to give them that additional piece of fuel. The next thing is confidence. Now, often people lack the confidence to make the change, and that's why they come for therapy, and particularly for hypnotherapy, because they know that it'll help them get that confidence. And what we do in hypnosis is find something that people have been confident in doing before, discuss that, and that's a way of demonstrating to that person you already have the capacity within you. Okay. You already have the confidence, and perhaps in the past you applied it to taking your driving test or whatever it might be. So often we'll talk in the pre-induction element about ways in which somebody has been confident before in the past. And then it's also relevant to touch on why they don't have that confidence at the moment in the present. Because if you're trying to get them to be confident in the future, you really need to know what's going on in their lives. So within that ego strengthening element of confidence, we will often ask people in the pre-induction talk, is there anything else apart from the reason you've come to me that's stressing you or causing you a problem? Because that might be something that will knock their confidence and mean that they don't carry out the suggestions the way that you want to. So there's focus, there's confidence, and then the next one is motivation. Now you'd think if somebody comes along for help, for assistance, for therapy, that actually they want to make that change, they're motivated to make that change. Well, what I will say to you is that in most cases, if somebody was motivated, they wouldn't need therapy.
So what brings them then? What is it?
Okay, there's two things, and I'm not being glib when I say it. People come along for hypnotherapy with two mindsets, two different mindsets. The one is, I want to get better and I know this is a tool that can help me. And the other mindset is one that's often unacknowledged, and that is, I want to be able to tell everybody I've tried everything and nothing has worked. Now, if they do that, they are then giving themselves permission to continue their behaviour.
Right, okay.
Like a smoker saying, well, I went for Reiki, I went to the doctor, I had hypnosis, I had nicotine patches, nothing's worked. Now, if they can say to people that they've tried everything, they are therefore giving themselves permission to remain as they are.
And stopping people going, when are you going to stop?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I've tried that. Right. So it is quite interesting when you see how people behave, that they will come along and pay for a therapy session knowing full well that they've got no intention of taking those suggestions on board. And that's why it's really important that you speak to somebody before you have the session with them.
Can you actually tell those people who are really there just because it's like a lip service and it's like...
Yeah, it's quite easy. They're the yes but people. Yes, but I can't come for a session this week because I've got this going on. Yes, but I'll do it after Christmas. Yes, but... The interesting thing is when somebody, for example, with smoking cessation, picks up the phone and says, I want to stop. Can you see me today? You would never, ever see somebody today. And the specific reason for that is somebody's made a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, I'm going to do it now. They haven't thought it through. When you're making a change, when you're making a genuine, profound change, like smoking cessation or weight loss or dealing with a phobia, whatever it might be, you need to have thought about the implications of who you're going to be and how you're going to live your life after you no longer have that problem. So if somebody says, I want you to see me now, no, categorically not. And also when in practice, in real terms, it's a good idea to get as much information from them before they see you. And that's why I have an online form that people complete. I keep it fairly loose, saying, is there anything else you would like to tell me before you see me for the session? Because then people can put down what they're thinking, what they're feeling, why they want to stop, and it builds a whole story around it. Another thing, for example, again with smoking cessation, and this is a particular one, and that is if somebody else phones up and says, I want you to see my husband, or I want you to see my brother, or I want you to see my daughter, would you see them?
Well, you've got to get the person to want to go in the first place, haven't you?
You would never, ever book somebody in if it is not that person who makes the call. And they could argue, oh no, they're very busy, or they're working, or they're this, or they're that. Nobody is too busy to pick up a phone, have a conversation, or to send an email. And if they're too busy to do that, they're actually too busy to listen to you. It's you get a lot about somebody's attitude towards the process and towards actually getting better.
At the beginning.
Right at the beginning, right at the immediate first contact. And it is so important. The most important thing in being a good therapist is knowing who not to see.
Do you ever get, given that you can get people ringing up their husbands or their wives, do you ever get people going, oh, I want my wife to come with me, or I want my husband to come with me? Do you ever get like people not wanting to not be on their own, or
occasionally?
And can you do it that way?
No, because what you have there is a codependency between those two individuals that has an impact on the way in which the treatment occurs.
Right.
You would never, unless you're working with a minor, you would never have somebody else in the room with you when you're working, because it would be highly inappropriate. It's inappropriate because of the information that person might want to share with you. It's inappropriate because of the information that the person who is not being hypnotized gets about that whole process. And if you as a therapist allow yourselves to be manipulated by your patients before, and what I mean by that is, oh yes, I will see you this afternoon, and be bullied into it, or yes, of course your husband can sit in on the session. If you bend your rules, or they attempt to get you to bend your rules before they see you, they do not have the right mindset to listen to your therapeutic suggestions. So it's incredibly important to know when to say no. Because if people think you will just appear for them this afternoon, or that if they think they can manipulate you, they will manipulate the process, and therefore it will be not of any use to them. So it's really important that you're establishing a relationship whereby you have rules and you have boundaries. And that's the most important thing in making sure that you work well with somebody. Because if they know that you're not going to bend, I will often say to people, probably more often now that I've been doing this for so many years, I will say, I don't think you're ready. I don't think you're ready to see me yet. Come back to me when you've actually thought it through.
And do they go, why?
Yeah, and I will spell it out to them.
So you're quite open, just say.
Absolutely. Always open, always clear, never aggressive, but always making it really clear that I can help you with the process that I have if you come to this process with the right mindset. And mindset's really important. And that is actually a relevant point in talking about ego strengthening. Say somebody said, I want to make a change. I want to deal with this phobia. And then when you talk to them and you say, well, is there anything else that's going on in your life at the moment? This is all pre-induction. So in the first communication that you have. And they say, well, I've got a presentation at work and that's stressing me out. And I've got this going on and the car's broken and that's good. And I will often say, once you've dealt with all of that, come back to me and we can, we can work with it. And if that person then says, my life is always like that, what is it they're telling you?
Just basically saying that they don't even get a break to come up for air. It's just constant.
Yeah, but what does that say? They don't put themselves first.
Yeah,
So it's about ego
true.
strengthening. A person who puts themselves first may have all the same situations going on in their life, but they cope with them because they don't allow it to intrude. They've got good boundaries. They say, okay, the car needs fixing. If they know there's somebody else who can sort that out for them, they know how to delegate. They know how to communicate. They don't take on extra on board. And I'm sure and this is a little bit sad really, because a lot of people like this end up being therapists. There are people who are quite needy and they want to help. And then they take so many things on board that it is that person who is no longer coping. Everybody else is fine. That's another thing when I talked about therapists. That's why you have to create a therapeutic boundary. That's why you have to create a therapeutic persona. That's why you can be a bit odd, unusual, not necessarily completely sorted, perhaps a bit needy in your personal life, but those are not the qualities and experiences that you take into your professional life. So say that person came along who said, I've got all these things going on in my life, it is always like that. I would say, do you know what? I can help you with one thing. If you do want to come to me for a session, it will be a session prior to dealing with your problem. But what I want to do is to build you up first. It's like a bit of mental stamina. The same way if you are getting fit physically. It's flexibility, it's stamina, and it's general motivation to actually keep those things going. But people don't do it with their mental health. It's not something they work on. I think more so now, post-COVID, people realise it's becoming a problem. So if somebody came with a problem and they still wanted to see me, I'd do a pre-session, which was purely, exclusively ego strengthening, giving them the focus, the motivation and the confidence to start making the changes generally in their life that are giving them this low-level stress. And
people are quite happy with that suggestion of doing like a pre-session.
Some people are, but some people don't, because they're so entrenched in this is who I am, as opposed to this is what I do. And those are two very distinct things. If they believe it's part of their character, they're not going to change. But if they believe it's part of a situation that they find themselves in, they will often be grateful, because it's all about giving somebody tools. And the major tool that you will give them is teaching them self-hypnosis, where they can then do the ego strengthening for themselves. Remember who they were before all of this stuff happened. When they were in charge of however many people or whatever it was. It's all about the best work that you can do as a therapist in ego strengthening is to remind somebody who they are or who they have been at their best. Because it's potential then. It's not about saying, oh, you're going to be somebody different in future. I'm going to say, do you remember all that stuff you've done? And a key question, because I remember you asked, how do you know? A key question is, if I ask somebody, tell me something that you've done that you're proud of, and they'll say, well, I can't really think of anything. And often these are people who've done phenomenal things, but they don't rate the things that they've done. And sometimes it's important, and that's where the ego strengthening comes in, is to remember the amazing things you've done. Remember the amazing achievements. Remember what you've overcome. Remember who you became. And all of those things are really important in establishing a baseline of stability, a foundation on which you can then build and make changes occur. Because you can't make change happen if you don't have that good, solid foundation. And that's why ego strengthening will always, always be part of a hypnosis session. And sometimes it will be the only piece of work that you will do.
That's really interesting. So I suppose people, as you say, that there's got to be a time when they were proud of themselves or they're at the confident best. But I think just generally we tend to sort of always look at a negative, don't we? And I think we're saying we as women or we as humans? No, just humans. I think human nature is to always look at why didn't we instead of sort of, I did it type of thing.
I would differentiate between the way that men and women think.
Really?
Yeah. Or certainly the male and the female brain. The male brain will go, yeah, did that, proud of it. Female brain will go, oh, well, anybody could do that.
So, okay, so if it's female or a bit more like that, do you get more females having therapy then?
Certainly up until COVID.
Oh, okay.
It was very much more women taking control of their lives and choosing to make changes. If men came, it was predominantly for a single variable, such as I've got a phobia, I want to stop smoking. So in other words, there was a situation that they'd identified and they saw this as a practical tool for making change. Wow. But since COVID has happened, all bets are off because people have spent so much time in their own heads that, and it's not being male or female, it's conditioning, it's social conditioning. And now we're allowed more to talk about mental health. We're allowed to discuss the things that are concerning us. And I mean, things like Men in Sheds, which is absolutely a fantastic organisation whereby men can actually meet up in sheds, make stuff, fix stuff and talk about their problems. The talking part is a peripheral, but it actually becomes the hub of everything that they do. And so it's really, really important to have places in which you can discuss your mental health without it being indulgent. And that's why I think self-hypnosis is such a powerful tool, because it's totally private. You can go into that space and you can communicate with the better part of you, if you like, the confident part of you, and say, what happened? I used to be like you. And there are therapies, there are processes and protocols that you can use where you go into a safe space in your mind and you actually sit in therapy with your better self, and your better self can say, come on, remember what we used to do? We used to do this and used to do that. And it's totally safe. And the therapist on the outside of this person's head will often have no idea what those conversations might mean. Oh, wow. But in self-hypnosis, you can do that for yourself whenever you want to. Yeah. And you can analyse things that didn't really go the way you wanted to. And you can also pre-plan how you want to be in a situation that hasn't yet occurred. So it's really, really powerful. And that's one of the reasons that I've been doing the Hypno-SOS podcasts, so that people, within 10 minutes can just go into that space, access that strength, the focus, the confidence, the motivation, improving their sleep patterns, because in your sleep, you resolve a lot of this anyway. Not everybody needs therapy. That's a given. Not everybody needs therapy, but the way I look at it is hypnotherapy is a tool that you can use for yourself to supplement everything else that you're doing.
So therapists are really busy at the moment then?
Therapists are extremely busy at the moment, and they're busy with a lot of people who would never have considered therapy at all. And that's something, are there any good things that came out of COVID? Well, if it changes us a bit as a society so we feel more open and able to talk about our mental health issues, especially young men who are completely isolated and highest rates of suicide and wouldn't reach out. The dialogue is opening up. The door is starting to open up for people to actually say, no, I don't feel that great.
That's good. Okay, yeah. Interesting. Okay.
So, any questions about ego strengthening?
No, not really. So basically you can do it on its own.
Yes.
If not, you can wrap it up almost at the end of your session. So it's almost like reconfirming,
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
And as well as it being the fuel to take them to make the next change, it's also reaffirming who they are.
Right. And how long should just that ego strengthening when you're just reconfirming, how long would that take?
10 minutes.
Oh, is that all?
10 minutes. Bearing in mind, you will have had the pre-induction talk.
Yeah.
And in the pre-induction talk, you're not just talking about the problem. You're talking about the person and you're talking about their capabilities. Because what's really important in any good therapy is to make sure that the person who is in the chair having the therapy believes they have the capacity to make that change. Because if you don't ask the questions properly, you, the therapist, are imposing your beliefs on that person's world. Well, everybody could do this. Everybody could do that. No, what you're saying is I could do that. So it's really important to find out what that person's potential is. You know, how much time do they have to do it? What's their history? Where do they want to be with it? How do they want to make these changes? So it's all about, that's how personalizing a treatment plan is a critical part. And that's something I think we should have a separate conversation.
So like when you you do this is just me, I'm trying to put it into stages. So they want therapy, they fill in a questionnaire that you then receive. You then get them in for a session.
Generally, I will have a conversation with them beforehand. Yeah. So before they will fill the form.
Will that be face to face, or will that be on the phone?
On the phone, usually.
Okay.
I do prefer to see them, obviously, because you're picking up more mental cues, or more facial cues. But the conversation would be first, followed up by the booking, and as part of the booking, they have to fill the form in.
Okay. So then when they come for their first session, will you give them hypnotherapy then, or will that just be a discussion?
No, you do the pre-induction talk, then you start with a hypnosis. The thing is, at the first session, the first real communication with somebody, the first session, you as the therapist have the best chance of helping that person. All the others, to a certain degree, are diminishing returns because their expectation of the process is so high. Whereas when people go in for the first time, their expectation is quite low. And I know you experienced that when I hypnotised you all those years ago, it seems, that because you don't expect anything, it feels quite impactful. And then on subsequent occasions, it doesn't feel quite so impactful because you've got an expectation of how it's going to be. Right.
And then after you've done the hypnotherapy, then, I know we touched on this when we spoke before, but you ask them if there's anything they want to talk about. You don't prompt them if they say, no, I'm okay, but that's it. If they say, yeah, I do want to talk, you just then allow them to talk.
You talk, you listen.
So you're just listening, really.
It's very rare you'd make many comments at that point, unless it's about confirmation.
I take it, obviously, you'd need to write notes, everybody, for each client. Are you writing notes when you're with them, talking to them, or are you doing it after they've left, or...?
Everyone's different. Some therapists have their clipboard and they make the notes there and then.
Okay.
Others, such as myself, I know this sounds strange. When we talked about creating the therapeutic persona, I also have a persona of a secretary, and she keeps notes in my head. So while I'm working, there's part of my brain that's making the notes, and then as soon as that person has gone, I will write it all up. Simply because I feel that because of the way that I work, it does break the rapport a little bit. If somebody breaks off every so often and they're writing, because you're thinking, well, what are you writing down there?
Yeah, what are you scribbling at? Yeah.
So it depends very much on what you feel comfortable with. And also, if you are going to use notes, which you will at the beginning, use notes for scripts, you say to that person, I've got this prepared script, and just so you're aware, I'll be reading from this.
And obviously, your notes, they can have access to your notes. Is that right? Do they have access? They don't.
No. So. Those notes are confidential. In all the years of practice, I've never had anybody ask for access to the notes. But what I have had is people asking for recordings of the session. Now, what I say is no. And there is a reason for that. In the hypnosis element of the session, there will be aspects of the suggestions that we want that person to forget that they've heard.
So by them listening to it after?
So by them listening to it, it's like scratching off a scab the whole time.
Yeah.
They'll go, why did she say that? How did I react? Oh, I don't think that's right. What you don't want is somebody consciously analysing something which has already been unconsciously accepted in the hypnosis. And if they say, well, I want something to do, I want, something to keep listening to afterwards, you recommend a generic MP3. For example, health and well-being, or self-hypnosis, or even confidence, or focus, or motivation. You can create your own audios, which you can then send to them.
So you could actually create audios for each and send them out to your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think it's really good that person has something to listen to for the following 3 weeks until the information goes from their conscious awareness to their unconscious. And if they're listening to the same voice that they had the therapy with, just at night before they fall asleep, when they're going into that hypnagogic state, they take all that positivity with them as well.
Okay, that's good.
Because it means they get that massive reinforcement.
Yeah.
And they own more of it, rather than it being somebody telling them what to do.
It's more personal, isn't it?
Much more personal. And audios are very effective. They are more effective when they've met you and then they're listening to them subsequently. But they are really effective because it gives somebody we're creatures of habit, and if you take something away, such as somebody's problem, putting a new habit, a new behaviour, for example, listening to an audio every night, helps them get through that place where there might be a vacuum and they might be tempted to fall back into their old ways of thinking and being.
So do most therapists do that then? Send out
No.
Short? Oh, okay.
No. Everybody is different. They're different in the way that they're taught. They're different in the way that they approach it. But what I've found is, because I had a very comprehensive training, and I found that it was really interesting to know all of these techniques. But ultimately, I ended up using maybe a dozen of often the most simple, straightforward processes. Because generally, when people are highly stressed, they don't want or need something that's hugely complex. What they want or need is a tool. Yeah. And I think therapy, especially hypnotherapy, has changed in the last 20 years because therapists and doctors and healthcare professionals' relationships with their clients, patients, has changed. It used to be, I'm the one in the white coat, I'll tell you what to do.
Well, they're almost like God, weren't they?
That's it, God in a white coat. That's actually an expression that used to be used. But now, it's much more of a dialogue between you and your healthcare professional. And so, because of that, and the engagement of the person who's coming along for therapy, then you have to be prepared to engage in that dialogue.
Okay.
And it just means it's a much more... The therapy is built very much between the two of you. I'll bring the tools, you bring the problem, we'll put it all on the table and we'll see, which is the most appropriate tool. And as I say, the really complex ones, the really intricate techniques will often be old school on the basis of this is a God in a white coat telling you what to do, and it's more authoritarian.
Okay.
And I know you're aware of the difference between authoritarian and permissive techniques. And sometimes it is really valid to do an authoritarian technique, really valid, telling somebody what to do. But generally now, because of this change in the therapeutic relationship, it's much more about being permissive and inviting somebody to make the changes and being a lot more gentle and a lot more sharing that experience.
So given that it's becoming that way and it is that way now, so when would you still use the authoritarian?
That's a really good question. When do you think you might use it?
I don't know, to be honest. I know I've read about it in my course.
Authoritarian techniques are... Let me give you an example. I'll give you a really clear distinction between the two, because there's the sort of people who come and there's the sort of processes that they're engaging with. The sort of people who come along. Now, say, for example, you're a general in the army and you come to me for therapy to stop smoking, and I say, very gently, just you can make yourself comfortable there, or do sit down. You can tell me something or you don't have to tell me something. And he'll say, what? How do you think a general in the army would react to that?
Well, they're not used to it is authoritarian, isn't it? So you've just got to reciprocate there.
They're used to being told what to do.
Yeah.
They're also used to having their orders accepted.
Okay.
And in the relationship that I now have in that therapeutic room, I outrank that general because I've got something to tell him that he doesn't know. And if I say, sit down, close your eyes, focus on your breathing, you're going to stop smoking. Yes, ma'am.
So it's not anybody in the forces then who's...
No, never say anybody in the forces.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people are used to being... take orders, don't they?
A lot of people are used to being taking orders, but a lot of people don't like taking orders. It has to be somebody who understands the importance of accepting a clear order and the sense in which it is made. It's really, really interesting. If you have somebody who is part of that, and also I'm talking about, captains of industry, people who, work in emergency situations. You've got doctors, you've got paramedics, you've got firemen. They are used to, you do this and you do it now demands, without question. And it's about an understanding of the significance of an authoritarian delivery of a suggestion and the fact that it's going to work. So you can't say everybody in the military and everybody in that environment. It has to be people who are comfortable with accepting orders, giving orders. People who are used to giving orders are perfectly good in that environment.
Okay.
It's a really clear I can tell you a story from a long time ago. I saw quite a large number of members of the House of Lords at different times in my career. And I had a funny situation once where the guy came in and they said, sit down, close your eyes. And he said, yes, Nanny.
Called you Nanny? Oh, for goodness sake.
Well, he opened his eyes and we both burst out laughing. And I said, did you used to do what Nanny told you? And he said, yes. I said, well, Nanny says, close your eyes. So, no problem. Stop smoking. Got lots of referrals out of that one.
Wow.
So, I know it sounds comedic. But when somebody buys into that, it's so quick. Authoritarian suggestions are so quick, so clean. And the other situation is in an emergency situation.
Okay.
Where you get somebody to take themselves mentally away from the pain that they're experiencing. And that, I have had experience of that in the past. And it is phenomenal to watch. Somebody who's in extreme pain just say, right, we're going to put that over there. Close your eyes, listen, focus. And then you keep them there, away from their pain. So you can get some really, really wonderful effects out of using authoritarian techniques, partly because of the people who you're delivering it to, and partly because of the process. And then we've spent plenty of time discussing permissive techniques and how they are much more. They take longer because you have to give the suggestions in 3 or 4 different ways. You have to make sure the person's accepted them. You've got a whole different process going on. But say, for example, you were seeing somebody for 3 sessions. You could start in the first session being actually quite authoritarian, and then there's no longer any need to it. You can go for the permissive approach. But it is not about you and your delivery. It is very much about how that person receives it. But what I will be perfectly honest with you, Val, is over the years, because I've had so much success with people who are used to taking orders, I've done a lot of authoritarian work because they refer their friends who have the same sort of mindset.
Like-minded, yeah.
And that's, I think, actually quite an interesting point. And I think you asked me this question before, and that's how do you choose what you're going to be an expert in? Well, you don't. It chooses you. You will, for example, see somebody who's a spider-phobic and have no intention of seeing many spider-phobics, but she's a member of the National Spider-Phobic Association and tells everybody. And then suddenly 10 years later, you are an expert. And that's sometimes how it works.
Okay.
So you don't necessarily choose the thing that you're going to do.
Just naturally happens.
It will often choose you. It's an evolution. Okay. And that happens after 2 years of being in practice. After 2 years, you've got enough of a body of work behind you so that people can start to say, well, you're somebody who does this or does that or does the other. And of course, the more you do it, the better you're going to be at it.
So what was yours then? What do they all come to you for initially?
Well, you see, the thing is, it started out as smoking cessation, and I got lots and lots of people. And then I got a call. When you break your own rules and you fall down a hole, and I'll tell you, honestly, this is what happened. I didn't speak to the person on the phone. I was incredibly busy at the time, and I skipped that phase, and then she just came in for the session. And this person wanted to stop smoking, that's what I knew. But what I didn't know is that she was profoundly deaf. So I did a hypnosis session with her by doing eye-to-eye contact, and she lit red. So she was following what I was saying, and I would give her instructions in small chunks. So it would be, I want you to close your eyes and count down from 10 to 1. And when you've counted down from 10 to 1, you open your eyes again. So each piece of the script, I chunked down into minute elements. I was also doing eye-to-eye contact, and you can create pupil dilation. So it's an altered state of awareness. It's very hard to maintain. It was the most exhausting piece of work I've ever done in my life, because every time she looked at me, I had to maintain that pupil dilation. And naturally, instinctively, we don't do that because of light and everything else that's going on around us. But if your pupils are dilated, the person knows that you are absolutely interested and focused on them. So it's a big thing to do. But if you're short-sighted like me, it's not that hard to do it initially. To maintain it's hard. So I did this piece of work with her. She went away, very happy. She didn't know that was the first time I'd ever worked with somebody who was profoundly deaf. She just said, thank you, and left.
So you just like had to think on your feet how you're going to do it. Oh my goodness.
And then she turned out to be a court representative for people who were deaf who were going into court. So she was an interpreter, a signer. She knew everybody who was deaf in that part of London, and she sent them all to me. So suddenly I'm the only person in London doing hypnosis with profoundly deaf people. Yes, I became an expert. Every single problem that anybody who is hearing, somebody who is deaf has, and often with a lot more stress associated with it. So it was an interesting few years.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up doing that. And then doing a lot of work with anxiety. And then that's how I ended up becoming patron of Anxiety UK, because I was kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit of what the process could actually do. But I wouldn't have chosen it. Had I realised she was profoundly deaf, I probably wouldn't have taken her on board as a client. More for me. What it did teach me is the best teachers are your clients. Absolutely, the best teachers are your clients. I've had people walk in, and when you look at people, how they're dressed and the way they behave, you have to completely blank that and go, how can I help you? And then work with whatever it is that they give you. To be a therapist is incredibly challenging, because it challenges what you think you believe about people. And you can't be judgmental, and you can't be, you can't think you know it all, because you know bugger all. That's all I can say. Yeah. But what it has taught me is to be profoundly grateful for absolutely everything that I've got, and every day that I've got, and the capacity to express myself, and learning a tool sufficiently early on in my life so that I always had something I could fall back on, because it is, once you learn self-hypnosis, it's a tool for life. Yeah. You know, you can use it in all sorts of situations.
Yeah. Like I say, write a book on all the people that you've given therapy over
Client
the years.
confidentiality.
I know. Funny stories though.
Honestly, some of the people that I've met have been so fascinating, so bonkers, and so entertaining, including the guy who stood outside my house right at the beginning and played on his, must have been a Walkman or something, I don't know, Trust in Me, you know, from the Jungle Book. Yeah. Because it's the...
with the eyes.
It's the eyes, it's the snake trying to hypnotise. Right, yeah. And he stood outside with a bunch of flowers for about a week. Just not saying anything, just playing the music. And he had these flowers, and I just thought, okay, that's my first stalker.
Would you recommend then, given that, that it's always best to find somewhere to work as opposed to doing it in your home?
Absolutely. Working from home is fraught with all sorts of difficulties, including the fact that even though it's not intentional, you're giving out cues on who you are as an individual. Having a separate place, and I know a lot of people now are only working online, but if you are working online, make sure the background behind you, I think I've mentioned this before, have a screen, so it's a totally neutral area and a professional area, so that people don't know what else is there. And it is really, really important, especially for women, and yes, for men too, because unfortunately, all they've got to do is go online and they can find out X, Y, and Z about you. And
it's too much information.
It's quite scary what some people start to believe about you if you've helped them. And even if you haven't, I've been stalked by people I've never seen as patients, but they read about me online and made decisions about what they thought I was and what I could do, and,
Scary.
Yeah. But if you've got good boundaries, you accept that that's somebody else's reality, it's nothing to do with you, you can move on quite cleanly.
I think, like you say, they're the boundaries. I mean, we spoke about it the other day, and the more I'm hearing is like, set your boundaries and stick to them. Don't even just move them a little bit.
Do not deviate an inch. The moment you do, you will not get good therapeutic outcome.
Yeah, I get that now. Yeah, I can see that.
And it doesn't matter how much somebody shouts and screams. The fact is, if they want you, these are the terms. And if they want to play games, they will continue to play games, and you won't get a good outcome from them. And it's particularly with things like smoking cessation, where people are often very good at explaining why they keep their problem. Or, I'll stop smoking cigarettes, but I'll just have an odd joint here or there. Well, if it's in tobacco, it's still a cigarette. I don't make any commentary about drugs or not, but I'm here to help you stop smoking tobacco. If you're putting it in a joint, you're still smoking tobacco. So it's about making sure that they know what they're getting from you really cleanly.
Keep it clear. Okay, no, that's good. That's interesting. Thank you.
Good. Glad you found it useful.